not far downstream of some cabins comprising a future town of Rising Sun, Indiana, on the east banks of the Ohio River, Meriwether Lewis stopped at Big Bone Lick in present-day Kentucky to collect fossils for President Jefferson. William Clark returned here a few years later to do the same. Big Bone is in a small valley in Boone County, Kentucky. A physician, William Goforth, had excavated a large number of bones at that creek here and sold some in Europe. He reported his finds to Lewis before the expedition, who then transmitted a description of the bones, including one mammoth tusk of, quote, enormous size, to Jefferson. Lewis retrieved some bones, all of which were lost or stolen. After the expedition in 1806 or 7, William Clark, accompanied by his brother George, also visited Big Bone and removed at least 300 more bones and teeth. These also were forwarded to Jefferson, who then donated some to the Muséum d'Histoire Naturelle in Paris and the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. It is said that Jefferson's private collection was mistakenly ground into fertilizer by a servant. The physician Goforth was not the first foreign visitor to the salt deposit and creek. Gilles, a French officer, seems to have procured fossil pieces brought by some Indians who belonged to his party in 1739. Colonel George Croghan, on his passage down the Ohio in 1765, stopped at this salty marsh. He is the first white man who is known to have actually visited the site. Other visitors, because of the notoriety, included General William Harrison, also nicknamed Jefferson's Hammer, himself about 1795.
Two weeks ago I came to this place to collect some particular bones of the mammoth and other animals, and had it fully in contemplation to visit some of my old friends in Cincinnati and the vicinity. I have collected many of the bones, teeth, and tusks of the mammoth and the Siberian elephant, also the heads and many of the bones of two other animals of the sheep or goat species.
The first known remains of ancient bison were discovered at Big Bone in 1807 by Clark and date to just over 10,000 years ago. Today, this genus is represented by its direct descendant, the plains bison, or buffalo. Bison is an immigrant to the New World from Asia via the Bering Land Bridge, it is believed, and has a well-documented evolutionary history in North America. It is the direct ancestor of the modern animal, with a fossil history of intermediate transitional forms, leading to the large Ice Age animal and to the smaller living species. This bison antiquus was 15 to 25% larger overall than bison, standing taller and having larger bones and horns. It could be 15 feet long and weigh as much as 3,500 pounds. The horns measured about 3 feet from tip to tip. Many bones and teeth of this bison continue to be found at Big Bone Lick, although the great majority of these are only a few hundred years old. Their use of the salt licks here is well known and indicates numerous trails in this area or buffalo traces. The discovery of crude stone tools, apparently produced on this spot, add to the belief that this is the best documented late prehistoric bison kill and butchering site in the eastern half of North America. Remarkably, this remote wilderness lick, Big Bone, still retains the smell of ancient odors. It stinks, likely resulting from the remnants of sulfur mineral deposits in the marsh that also stores salt. Wildlife licked the land and water here, while humans carted away the salt and bones. According to one explainer in the day, quote, "Licks are meant, in the western country, springy places, naturally affording salt, in search of which the various species of herbivorous animals, both wild and domestic, resort to them in great numbers." Big Bone salt is deposited from numerous springs spread over several acres. One of the most famous accounts of adventures in Big Bone Lick took place a half century before Lewis sailed by. In 1755 or 56, Mary Draper Inglis, a pioneer woman and captive of the Shawnee and French marauders, was taken by her captors to Big Bone Lick on a salt-making expedition. Her capture, along with 2 young sons, was mentioned previously in this history, the Draper's Meadows Massacre. While some of her story cannot be fully affirmed, she reportedly stole a tomahawk from a Frenchman, quote, "sitting on one of the big bones cracking walnuts." She then ran away, following one of the animal traces to the Ohio River, and then followed and crossed the Kentucky wilderness and waterways, including the Kanawha and New Rivers, for roughly 500 or even more miles until she reached Virginia. 13 years later, one of her sons, John, returned and eventually wrote an account of his mother's ordeals. The other son died in captivity. There no longer are falls, more like rapids, to portage on the Ohio River at Louisville. Canal, dams, and river controls in place today alongside the city proper allow uninhibited boat traffic between the northeastern U.S. and the mighty Mississippi. Meriwether Lewis did not linger long at Big Bone because he had bigger fish to fry, so to speak. The vast western frontier was waiting. Floating to St. Louis takes time. Co-Captain William Clark, with his servant York and at least a half dozen other recruits, awaited Lewis's keelboat and canoes across from Louisville in Clarksville. William was apparently waiting for Lewis at the home of his brother, George Rogers. The zigzagging river at the time dropped roughly 26 feet in about 2.5 miles, creating sometimes impassable conditions for canoes. The pioneers, traders, and Indians sometimes steered through the rapids in high water, but needed to carry their vessels around the waterfalls, portaging, when shallow. A canal and locks built south of the falls starting in 1825 helped the navigators. Additional dams added later created a pathway entirely around the former falls of the Ohio. At this point in the journey toward the Mississippi, Lewis and Clark scrutinized and welcomed the gradually enlarged contingent of roughened and mostly single young men volunteers, all being, quote, men of character and ability. Each one carefully chosen for their diverse skills and apparent physical health. They variously spoke English, French, Shawnee, Omaha, and Indian Sign Language. Some were already enlisted in the Army. Others enlisted when they signed up. These included Charles Floyd, Sergeant, a cousin of the Virginia governor, John Floyd, and of another expedition member, Nathaniel Hale Pryor. Pryor had carpentry skills and later married and lived with an Osage woman until his death. Floyd was the only member to perish during the expedition. John Ordway was commanded to provide a detailed account and descriptions about Native American life. He issued provisions, took command while Lewis and Clark were away, kept records, and shared guard duties. Patrick Gass was the last living member of Lewis and Clark's crew. He died at age 98. Gass's carpentry ability also was enlisted to construct the winter quarters in North Dakota and at Fort Clatsop on the Pacific coast. After Sergeant Floyd's death near what is now Sioux City, Iowa, Gass was elected to assume Floyd's role as sergeant. Though uneducated, Gass wrote the first published account of the expedition a couple of years after the journey.